going on, everybody? How y'all doing, man? Welcome back to the Great Man Podcast. And before we get started on this episode, what I want everybody to do is I want you to like, subscribe, comment, and share because we want to make sure we get all the information out to the good people out there, man. I share it on all platforms. Don't matter. Just get it out there. So on today's episode, what we're going to talk about is use of force. Now, use of force is something that we use a lot in terms of like a continuum in terms of law enforcement. Military, they use a version of the law of use of force. They call it rules of engagement. On the civilian side, I'm going to call it use of force also. And in law enforcement, we call it a use of force continuum. Basically, what one person would do or whatever the situation dictated would depend on what kind of force we would use to respond to whatever we were being confronted with. So this episode, I'm going to break down use of force in 5 levels. So the first level being presence, and presence, in my opinion, can be 1 or 2. So in law enforcement, if we have a disturbance and we come to the scene, the first aspect of use of force is presence. It's what we call a show of force. On the civilian side, it can be considered presence also, standing your ground, even though I don't really want to use that term to apply to what I'm saying, stand your ground, but standing your ground, like basically standing up for what's going on. Like showing your presence. So that's an aspect of use of force also. But on the flip side of that, the absence of your presence, when you're no longer there, you've disengaged from the situation. So that's another aspect of use of force. Disengaging is always the more preferred tactic. So that's 1, presence. The second aspect of use of force is talking. And in my opinion, that is the most powerful tool in the tool belt of use of force. So if you can communicate to somebody, then you can actively deal with whatever the problem is. You can strategically talk them down, talk them off the ledge. You're able to, kind of express the desired outcome that you want verbally, and you avoid a lot of headache by being able to do that. And I want you to understand too that in law enforcement we call it like verbal judo, but in the civilian side, I want you to understand that when you are talking to someone, that can also go both ways. The way you speak to someone, you'd rather be able to um, uh, talk them down as opposed to yell them down. And you got to be careful with how you speak to someone also because it can be considered assault, not to be confused with battery. Battery is actually touching someone, putting your hands on them, striking them, whatever. But assault is verbally being abusive. So that's the second aspect of use of force. The third aspect of use of force, and what is the more popular version, is when you have to actually put your hands on somebody. Putting your hands on somebody, you can do 1 or 2 options. You can either do it open-handed, which is technically the preferred version of hands-on because, um, you know, it's considered a more passive form of a strike. So like an open hand strike would be like pushing someone, mushing somebody else. Then there's the closed hand or closed fist strike. And there's no explanation for that. That's straight punching somebody. And even a kick can be considered like a closed fist version of a strike too, because it's like a knee, a kick. Those are even though you're technically not using your hand, those are more intermediate versions of the of the strike, the hands on. So you have those two. Then you have the fourth aspect of use of force, which I break that down also in subcategories, and that's the less than lethal options. Less than lethal options can be your spray, can be your baton, and can be your taser. Now, less than lethal is not only um, something that can be applicable to law enforcement and military. Even though law enforcement and military both use spray, they both use batons, and they both use tasers. All three of those are available to civilians also. You ever heard of mace? That's spray. You ever heard of the baton? Using a stick, a club, same thing. And then there's the taser. There is a civilian version of the taser, and I'm not talking about a stun gun where you actually have to touch somebody. Taser has they have something that looks kind of like a mini black pistol. Not this. I'm not. This is not a plug to sell them, but they have a little taser called like a C2, I believe, and it does shoot out prongs. And it's actually more powerful than the law enforcement and military taser, because the law enforcement military taser, they only give you a electric shock of 5 seconds. The civilian version gives you the electric shock of 30 seconds. So just putting that out there, man. And I think it's called a C2, and you can actually get one of those things for like $400. And yeah, so there's that. And next, we're going to go to number 5, the um, the most extreme version of use of force, and that's the lethal. Lethal can be any weapon used. You can use even your intermediate weapons like a baton. Um, can be considered a lethal if you strike someone in the wrong place. Your closed fist, knee strike, kick can be considered a lethal if you strike someone in the wrong place or improperly use that tool. Um, Also, the most obvious is a firearm. Firearm is definitely a lethal. Even if you don't kill anybody with that firearm, you have escalated your use of force to the lethal end of the spectrum. Now, I will say that I didn't put knife on here, even though knife would definitely fall under the lethal um, category of use of force options. But here in the United States, unlike other parts of the world, but here in the United States, it is not very common for somebody to use a knife in a self-defense scenario. Although it does happen, it's not a common. It's not a common option. So that's why I didn't. That's why I didn't put that on there. But we're going to just understand that if you stab someone, slice someone, or cut someone, you have escalated that also to a lethal end of the spectrum of the use of force. So I do want to say this, that we started off with presence, we started off with talking, and we kind of escalated from there. But throughout the entire use of force, from presence all the way to even the lethal option, you're always infusing presence and talking. Obviously presence because you're not going anywhere. So, but you want to keep speaking, you want to keep communicating that you're telling somebody, what if you don't leave me alone, I'm going to shoot you. If you don't get away from me, I'm going to shoot you. Like, you want to keep communicating, and even after they've been shot, I'm using the most extreme aspect of it. Even after they've been shot, you want to communicate to law enforcement and emergency services what happened, where you are, what you look like, what's going on, where they've been hit. Um, since you're not law enforcement, you are not obligated to assist um, with any stop bleed actions or anything like that. But I just want to put that out there, that if at all possible, you want to try to avoid the lethal end of the spectrum for use of force. You always want to try to talk them back down, even if you end up putting hands on them. We've all seen fist fights where they kind of stop in the middle of the fight, or they kind of stop, and one of them, the one that seems to be getting the most advantage over the other ones. Tell them, man, leave me alone. I told you to leave me alone. Like it tries to disengage. They try to remove themselves, their presence, to try to de-escalate it as rapidly as possible. Now, we talked about a lot of aspects of the use of force, and when we got to the less lethal, and then even really when we got to the hands-on, less than lethal, and lethal aspects of use of force, I do want to say that you never want to act outside of your scope of training. Don't just go to the store and even buy spray and not know how to use it or not have practiced, drawing it. And I'm talking about just spray. I'm not even talking about using a baton or taser or firearm, because all of those things are, I mean, it should be common sense, but common sense ain't too common. So you definitely want to make sure that you are practicing as often as possible to be as effective as possible whenever implementing any type of weapon system, whether it be spray, a taser, baton, firearm. And I even go as far as saying, if you want any type of strikes, whether it be open hand or closed hand, if you have to put your hands on somebody, you gotta make sure that you're doing it with confidence. You gotta make sure that you're doing it with some type of plan. Don't just start wildly swinging and punching it, because you may unintentionally be attacking Bruce Lee. And but any type of options of force that you use, you definitely want to train. That's why I use and I say that we train hops here at the Great Man Podcast. We train hard, we train often, we train properly, and we train safely, because always training, is important, because you always rise and fall to your highest level of training. If you're not training, then you're gonna be it's gonna be obvious when the moment of truth happens. So with that being said, like I said, you never wanna act outside of your scope of training. Um, and you definitely if you're definitely carrying something, and this is a provable scope of training. Don't act outside of your provable scope of training. You know, something that you can prove that because if you get called to court on it, you got to know, you got to have something. You need to have something to stand on. So, um, lastly, too, if you're going to carry it, make sure that you are practicing with that um, practicing with that tool. So, anything else that we need to talk about, please put it in the comments. Any questions, comments, or concerns? Like I said, like, share, subscribe, comment. Other than that, my good people, man, I'm gonna catch y'all back here another time, all right? Train hard, train often, train properly, train safely. It's the Great Man Podcast, y'all. Peace.